Your service went down for 40 minutes yesterday afternoon, and the dependency it calls stayed healthy for 39 of them. You lost an evening, a few £1,000s of orders, and some trust from customers who never tell you they left. The outage was yours, and the code that caused it was code you were told to write by every library author and every article you have ever read. So which of your own good manners cost you the afternoon? Your own clients did it, with help from their defaults. The graph of your dependency shows a small wobble around 2 in the afternoon. The graph of your service shows a cliff. Your users saw a blank page for all 40 minutes. Two very different pictures, one shared cause, and no dashboard sold today draws the line between them. You have already survived this outage once under a different dependency, and you will meet it again in a month under a third. So what turned a wobble into a cliff? Two settings, mostly. A retry count and a wait, chosen one afternoon by somebody who has since moved teams, and never revisited by anybody at all. Small numbers, enormous consequences. Your users pay for them in abandoned baskets, and you pay in trust, which costs a great deal more than capacity ever does. Nobody tells you that the two most dangerous numbers in your service are the two you consider too boring to review. Would a larger instance buy any of that trust back? It would not, and here I want to annoy you slightly. You would think a client that waits politely and tries again is helping you out. Does it? No. It achieves the opposite, and it writes a cheerful logline while achieving it. That one default has cost this industry more revenue than any exotic distributed systems paper has ever saved it, and it arrives in your project switched on, tested, and recommended. Hold that question about your own retry count, since a measurement settles it later, and the answer will probably embarrass you. What you deserve over the coming quarter of an hour is arithmetic you can run against your own service this week, one small change that genuinely bounds the damage, and an honest account of where the famous cure quietly gives up. Note, none of this is rare or clever. The failure has a name, a well-known cure, a chapter in the reliability book Google published in 2016, and an Amazon article from 2015 that most engineers have seen quoted and never read. Competent teams still walk into it monthly. Seniority offers no protection at all. I used to think a longer wait was the whole answer, and I was wrong in a way that cost somebody a weekend. The vocabulary matters here, since 3 words do most of the work and 2 of them get used interchangeably by people who ought to know better. A retry means one client sending the same request again after a failed attempt. Backoff means the wait between those attempts. And jitter means deliberately randomizing that wait. 3 words, and the third is the whole subject, which is why it is the one your configuration file leaves out. Which of the 3 does your own client library hand you? Exponential backoff means the wait doubles on every attempt. 100 milliseconds, 200, 400, 800. The term exponential is doing honest work for once. The wait is a base delay multiplied by 2 raised to the attempt number. 5 attempts spread themselves across 3,100 milliseconds rather than 500, which is the entire idea in a single sentence, and the reason it reads as obviously correct. Analogy, think of it as a queue at a ticket machine rather than a crowd at a locked door. A crowd at a locked door rattles the handle together, over and over, at the same moment. A queue has an order and a spacing, so the handle gets one hand at a time. Backoff is the spacing. Jitter is what stops everybody deciding to rattle at the very same second. Notice which of those 2 your own library ships you by default. The failure mode has a name too, and it is the best name in the field, the thundering herd. 1,000 clients fail at the same instant, wait the same 100 milliseconds, and arrive back at the same instant, which is a herd rather than a queue. The herd is the term to remember, since every fix below gets judged on one question. Does it break the herd up, or does it merely shift the herd sideways? And one more term, since the naming here is unusually candid. A retry budget means a hard cap on retries expressed as a fraction of your traffic rather than a count per call. Envoy calls it a retry budget. Google calls it client-side throttling. Same object, 2 names, and it is the one that genuinely bounds anything. Almost nobody configures it, and almost everybody configures the other 2. Now the arithmetic, because the arithmetic is what makes this real. Your dependency normally answers in 20 milliseconds and you send it 10,000 requests a second. It starts failing half of everything. Your client is set to 3 attempts, which is the default in more libraries than you would like. Before I tell you what your service now sends, guess. Say the number out loud, then read on. 15,000 a second. The rule underneath that is Little's Law, published by John Little in 1961, which says the work in flight equals the arrival rate multiplied by how long each item takes. 10,000 first attempts, so 5,000 retries arrive from the half that failed, and offered load rose by 50% at the exact moment your dependency held the least capacity it has ever held. Then those retries fail too, because the dependency sits further underwater, so another 2,500 go out behind them. The term for this is retry amplification, and the arithmetic never gets harder than multiplication. So how much of your own worst hour was ever your dependency's fault? Case in point, double the attempt count, since somebody always does after an incident. 6 attempts against the same half-failure rate turns 10,000 requests into 19,687 attempts, which is very nearly twice your original traffic. Each attempt you add multiplies the fire, so the fix everybody reaches for after an outage makes the next outage arrive faster. Your own multiplier simply got applied a second time. Would you have caught that in review? Hang on though, since the crowd is exactly what synchronized Backoff builds, and that is where everyone gets lost. Backoff spaces out one client's attempts. It says nothing whatever about how many clients you have. 10,000 polite clients, each waiting a beautifully calculated 200 milliseconds, still deliver 10,000 requests 200 milliseconds from now. Politeness is a property of one caller, and load is a property of the crowd, which is wrong in precisely the way that empties a basket. So the fix is randomness, and here is how it works. Jitter picks your weight at random from a range rather than computing it. Full jitter weights a random amount between 0 and the current ceiling. Equal jitter weights half the ceiling, then a random half on top. Amazon measured both in 2015, and full jitter finished the work in fewer total calls, because the client that plans least spreads best. A deliberately random timer beating a carefully chosen one makes no sense until you see it, and it turns out to be the whole subject. The client that plans least wins. That should not be true of anything, and here it is true twice. Then the arithmetic of full jitter, since it takes one line and rewards saying aloud. Attempt 3 carries a ceiling of 800 milliseconds, so your weight becomes a random number between 0 and 800. 1,000 clients therefore land spread across 800 milliseconds rather than stacked on a single one, which works out at roughly 1 client per millisecond instead of 1,000 at once. Same attempts, same ceiling, one line changed. Where else does a random number generator buy you 1,000-fold smoothing for free? Then the number that actually bounds your load, since neither Backoff nor Jitter manages it. A retry budget works by counting, allow retries only while they stay under 10% of your normal request rate, and reject the rest instantly inside the client. 10,000 requests a second buys 1,000 retries a second, no matter how many clients you run or how enthusiastically each one gives up. Envoy implements exactly that, so the cap lands on the crowd rather than on one caller. Envoy will drop a retry it was explicitly configured to send, which sounds backwards and is the point. Which of your services could name its own Envoy budget today? Next, notice which end of your system ought to be doing the rejecting. A retry your own client suppresses costs you nothing at all. A retry your server rejects still costs a connection, a thread, a log line, and some fraction of the capacity you were trying to protect, which is exactly why client-side throttling belongs in the caller and not behind your load balancer. Google's guidance is blunt about that ordering. The cheapest request to serve is the one that never leaves the client. So which end of yours currently decides a retry is a bad idea? Next, the multiplication nobody authorizes, because retries nest. Your browser tries 3 times. Your gateway tries 3 times per browser attempt. Your service tries 3 times per gateway attempt. 3 layers, 3 attempts each, and 1 user tap becomes 27 requests at the bottom of your stack. Nobody chose 27. 3 people each chose 3, in 3 different repositories, in 3 different years, and every one of them was being careful. So who owns the number 27 in your stack? So the rule that follows is a deadline rather than an attempt count. Pass a time budget down the call chain, then let each layer retry only while budget remains, so a single tap costs at most the 2 seconds a human will sit through. Kubernetes clients, Envoy, and the Finagle library at Twitter all propagate deadlines for this reason, and Envoy will refuse a retry outright once the deadline has gone. Retry at the edge, or retry at the leaf, and never at both, because the middle is where the multiplication hides itself. One more step, and it is the cheapest one on the list. Cap the Backoff ceiling. A doubling sequence with no cap reaches half an hour by the 12th attempt, so your client sits there through a recovery that finished 29 minutes earlier. 10 seconds is a common ceiling. Does your own client name one? Most ship without it, because the default came from somebody optimizing a benchmark rather than your Tuesday afternoon. Now the parts where all of this quietly gives up, since a retry policy has a failure mode of its own and nobody draws it. The first limit is idempotency, which means a request you can safely send twice and still get one effect. A read is idempotent. A payment is not. Your retry library does not know the difference, and it will cheerfully charge a customer twice on your behalf while logging a successful recovery. In practice, a good deal of what your clients retry out never to be retried at all. A 404 is a fact about your request rather than a mood your dependency happens to be in, so sending it again 3 times is asking the same question louder and slower. Retry on timeouts, on connection failures, and on the codes that explicitly mean come back later. Everything else is your client arguing with a correct answer. How many of the status codes yours retries were ever going to change their mind? Caveat, the ambiguous timeout is worse, and it is the limit I find hardest to explain away. Your call time's out. You do not know whether the write landed. The dependency may have committed it and lost the reply, or never received it at all, and no retry policy anywhere cannot tell those two apart without help. So the safe pattern requires a key the server remembers, which Stripe calls an idempotency key, and that still requires the server to cooperate with you. In practice, retries also hide a shortfall rather than repair one. When your dependency is simply too small for the traffic you send it, a perfectly tuned backoff converts a fast failure into a slow one and hands you the same shortfall 30 seconds later. No amount of waiting buys capacity. That depends on somebody spending money, and a retry policy is a way of postponing that conversation for another quarter. And there is a trade-off you are making without noticing, since every retry you send is latency a user sits through. 3 attempts with a 1-second ceiling is up to 3 seconds of somebody watching a spinner, for a request that was never going to succeed. Fail fast and you look broken. Retry patiently and you look slow. Which of those two would your own customers pick? And the honest limit on all of your guessing is that the server already knows the answer, and almost nobody asks it. Your client cannot know a recovery time and does not need to guess one, because a dependency under pressure knows its own far better than you will ever infer it, and the retry after header exists precisely so it can say so out loud. Honor that header when it arrives and your backoff stops being folklore and starts being a measurement somebody actually took. Does your own client read it? Mine did not, for about 4 years, while I cheerfully lectured other people about jitter. Note, the interaction with a circuit breaker is where most explanations stop, and it matters more than either piece alone. Backoff and jitter shape one client's attempts. A breaker removes them outright. Put a budget underneath the breaker and the two agree, since both are then bounding aggregate load. Leave the budget out, and your breaker opens on traffic your own retries manufactured, which is a machine reacting to its own reflection. So how would you know whether any of this is your problem? Ask yourself one number, and do not take my word for a thing. Take the ratio of attempts to requests at your dependency, for a normal day and for your worst hour. A healthy ratio sits near 1.05. Should your worst hour read 1.4, your clients are contributing 40% of the load they complain about. Set full jitter and a 10% budget, and read the same ratio again. Caveat, no principled way to pick the base delay is known to me, and I have looked properly. 100 milliseconds is what most libraries ship, 30 seconds is the ceiling everybody copies, and neither figure was derived by anybody. It is folklore passed between repositories, and there is no guarantee your traffic resembles whatever the default was tuned against. The honest answer is we tune it until the graphs look calm, then stop. Which brings us back to the retry count you were asked about at the start. Multiply your peak request rate by your attempt count, compare that answer with what your dependency can genuinely serve, and you will know before your next incident whether the outage is already scheduled. So the real question is not how long to wait. Ask instead which of your calls can be safely repeated at all, and whether anybody wrote that down. Answer that one and the timing turns into a detail. Your call, and I would rather you made it on a Tuesday than at 2 in the morning.